Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the most intensely debated, deeply philosophical texts in human history, the Book of Romans. Now, I know a lot of people approach Romans as if it's just this dry, ancient list of rules. But as we're going to see today, based on Dr. Ted Hildebrandt's fascinating analysis, it's actually this massive battleground of unanswerable philosophical ideas. We are about to explore tensions that have literally kept scholars awake for centuries.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with law, grace, and sin. Then we'll hit the struggle of sanctification, followed by destiny versus human choice. After that, we'll break down the tulip theological framework, talk about embracing mystery and wonder, and wrap it all up with practical Christian living. Let's get started.
Part 1. Law, Grace, and Sin. Let's look at the purpose of ancient rules.
To really get Romans, we first have to grapple with what the ancient Jewish law was actually meant to accomplish in the grand scheme of human history. And honestly, scholars are completely divided on this. The traditional or old view sees Romans as this massive clash between law and grace, heavily focused on individual salvation from sin. It kind of used Judaism as a foil to Christianity, the flesh versus the spirit. But there's a newer, more sociological view championed by scholars like James Dunn and E.P. Sanders. They argue the text isn't just about individual sin at all, it's really about inclusion versus exclusion. In their view, things like circumcision or eating kosher were exclusive ethnic markers. The whole goal in Romans, then, is to transcend those markers and create a unified, universal church for both Jews and Gentiles.
But regardless of which camp you fall into, the text highlights a subversive truth about the law itself. The ancient law was actually never meant to be a checklist to prove how good you are. In fact, people often flip the law entirely on its head to try and establish their own self-righteousness. But its actual function? It was simply to expose our flaws and quicken our conscience. Think about Abraham. He was justified by his faith completely independent of the law, long before circumcision or the Mosaic rules even existed. So this beautifully sets up the universal human need for grace, entirely apart from just blindly following rules.
Moving on to Part 2, the struggle of sanctification, or, as I like to call it, the inner tug-of-war.
So now we're shifting from external ancient laws to something intensely personal. Let's define our terms here. Sanctification is the active, ongoing process of being made holy. It's all about taking every thought captive. But practically speaking, how on earth do you do that? Well, the source gives us this brilliant analogy. It's about practicing the presence of God even in the most mundane moments. Imagine trying to stay spiritually focused while sitting in a mind-bending physics class, or, say, scrubbing dishes in the dining hall. It takes immense effort. It's much like the 17th century monk Brother Lawrence, who committed to washing dishes for the absolute glory of God.
And this brilliantly illustrates the agonizing reality of that effort. Just listen to this verse. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. Wow. Now, some argue this describes life before belief, or maybe just the struggles of a new believer. But there's a really compelling perspective out there, echoed by thinkers like Watchman Nee, suggesting this is actually the mark of a deeply mature Christian. The paradox here is that the closer you get to the light, the more aware you become of the shadows. The inner war doesn't just magically disappear when you believe, it actually intensifies as your conscience sharpens. So this intense inner struggle over our daily choices forces us to zoom out a bit and ask a massive, unanswerable rhetorical question. How does our human choice fit with divine election? Think about it. If we are out here fighting tooth and nail to choose the good, did God actually already decide our path before we were even born?
That brings us to Section 3, Destiny versus Human Choice. Welcome to the great cosmic debate.
We are now stepping right into the theological crossfire that has fractured scholars for centuries. Does God predetermine everything, or do we have genuine free will? Well, to wrap our heads around how experts handle this, we need to understand the concept of an antinomy. Now, this is very different from a paradox. A paradox is just a riddle you can solve. For example, a father and son are in a car crash. The father dies. The son is rushed to the hospital. The surgeon takes one look at the boy and says, "I cannot operate on him, he is my son." How's that possible? The answer is, the surgeon is his mother. See, a paradox tricks the mind, but it has a solution. An antinomy, as described by scholar J.I. Packer, is totally different. It's two principles, like God's absolute control on one hand and human free will on the other, that appear completely contradictory, yet both are clearly taught in the text. You can't solve it. You just have to hold both to be true, and that creates a profound sense of mystery and wonder. But of course, we humans love to solve things, right? So, two dominant camps naturally emerged. First, the Calvinist perspective. This one heavily emphasizes God's absolute sovereignty.
God is king, ruling the universe, and through divine election, he predestines outcomes before you're even born. On the flip side, we have the Arminian perspective. This camp emphasizes human choice, arguing that God's predestination is actually based on his foreknowledge of the genuine free choices we will make. And just to complicate things even further, there's the openness of God theory. This suggests God knows multiple possible futures. It's kind of like a GPS route to Niagara Falls. The end destination is guaranteed, sure, but there are dozens of routes you can freely choose from to get there. All right, Section 4, the Tulip Theological Framework. Let's unpack these 5 points. Let's break down this specific acronym that's often used to systematically explain the Calvinist approach to salvation. T stands for total depravity, the idea that humans are sinful right to the core. But is depravity truly total? The source shares a wild anecdote about a maximum security inmate with 11 life sentences who escaped and, incredibly, spent his time on the run doing charity work for the homeless in New York City. Makes you think. U is unconditional election, meaning God chooses people regardless of their inherent goodness, like choosing Jacob, who was a known liar, over Esau. L is limited atonement, the concept that Christ died only for the chosen, though I should mention this is hotly debated by those pointing to verses saying he died for the whole world. I is irresistible grace, meaning when God calls, you literally cannot resist. And finally, P is the perseverance of the saints. This is about eternal security. Those stories like King Solomon's completely falling into idolatry show us the deep, deep complexities of this final point.
So the crucial point is, all of this brings us to a massive roadblock. If we accept that God is completely sovereign, and his mind is just this unsolvable mystery, well, how do we account for the existence of immense evil, pain, and suffering in the world?
Which leads us nicely into Section 5, Embracing Mystery and Wonder, exploring the limits of human understanding.
When faced with the sheer reality of human suffering, the text strongly advises against arrogant dogmatism. We really shouldn't be out there heretic hunting, attacking folks whose theological formulas look a bit different from ours. Instead, we need to embrace intellectual humility about what we simply cannot know. This specific heartbreaking struggle is called deodacy, defending God's goodness in a world absolutely full of evil. And the source material offers some profound comfort here through the concept of the pathos of God. See, it's the idea that God is not just some distant, unfeeling clockmaker. Instead, God enters directly into our pain. The scriptures don't highlight Jesus laughing. They very specifically highlight that Jesus wept. God feels the profound, gut-wrenching rejection of humanity and weeps right alongside us in our suffering.
And after navigating all these incredibly dense cosmic and theological arguments, we're talking law, grace, predestination, deep suffering. How exactly does the Apostle Paul conclude this heavy section of Romans? Well, not with a neat logical formula, that's for sure. He concludes with awestruck doxology. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments. It's a powerful reminder that ultimately the universe isn't centered on human logic, it's centered on the unfathomable glory of the divine.
Let's move to our final section, number 6, Practical Christian Living, taking it from theory to daily action.
Let's see how this builds. We are bringing these massive, cosmic theories crashing right back down to earth to focus on everyday behavioral ethics, specifically in chapters 12 through 14. Because if you actually believe all this stuff, it demands action. First, Romans 12 directs us to overcome evil not with more evil, but with active, intentional good. Second, Romans 13 challenges readers to submit to governing authorities. And guys, that was a radical command, given that the early church was being actively, brutally persecuted by those very same authorities. Finally, Romans 14 introduces the concept of protecting the weaker brother. Basically, this means willingly curtailing your own personal freedoms, like what specific foods you eat or whether you observe the Sabbath, simply out of love. You do it to avoid causing someone else to stumble in their faith. It's about choosing community and love over needing to be right.
And that leaves us with a final echoing challenge. We've explored the immense tension of ancient laws, the completely unsolvable antinomies of destiny and choice, and the heartbreak of a suffering world. So, my question to you is this. How will you balance the profound, unanswerable mysteries of the universe with the practical, loving, and self-sacrificing choices you have to make every single day? Take that thought with you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.